Hi, everyone. I'm Nat. I wanted to take a moment to thank everyone for joining us for this RoberCon pop-up event. Since we can't meet for our annual weekend extravaganza, which would have been back in September because we got to do things differently right now, hopefully not for too much longer. We want to kind of meet and kind of geek out over various things over Zoom. So RoberCon is and the Roberson Museum and Science Center and the Binghamton Philharmonic is located in beautiful Binghamton, New York, which is also on the ancestral land of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and more specifically, the Onondaga Nation, which we recognize them as the past, present, and future stewards of this land. So for today's RoberCon pop-up event, we're really excited to have the music director for the Binghamton Philharmonic, Daniel, to help us geek out over the Harry Potter film score. So right now we have a Harry Potter book and film nerd and a music nerd, and together we can really geek out over this soundtrack. So Daniel is widely recognized as one of America's finest conductors, earning critical acclaim for his fresh interpretations of the standard repertoire of his commitment to creative programming. He served for 11 seasons as the music director of the Syracuse Symphony, and in June 2019 was appointed the music director of the Wichita Symphony. And as of 2015-16 season, he was named the principal guest conductor of the Tulsa Symphony. And in May 2018, he was appointed the position of the music director of the Binghamton Philharmonic. So he's doing stuff. And the Binghamton Philharmonic, as part of this event, I will pop it in the chat here for everyone to see. The Binghamton Philharmonic will be putting on a beautiful live concert, and you can click that link below, on October 30th so you can hear this beautiful music live. And over the course of the conversation, please feel free to type any questions in the chat, and I will pass them along and ask them at the end. And with all that out of the way, excuse me, welcome, Daniel. It's good to have you here. How are you?
Good. Thank you, Nat. It's great to be here and great to have all of you here also, all the rest of you.
Yeah. So are you excited for the upcoming concert on October 30th?
I am extremely excited about it. I love conducting film scores in general. It's a nice break from a lot of the other things I do. Although when I say break, it's not that it's easy in any way. Conducting Beethoven has its challenges, and Mahler and Wagner and so on. But you know, the music of John Williams and Patrick Doyle in this case is also quite challenging, but in a completely different way. It's much more picturesque. Obviously, the music was intended to be with film, but the great thing about this particular music is that it can stand on its own and still evokes so much from the listener's imagination, especially the people who are well acquainted with the movies.
Yeah, that's actually an interesting point. But I am really excited to see the Binghamton Philharmonic has a schedule coming up that we can all enjoy for the upcoming season. So you brought up an interesting point about music that's made for, I guess, listening, and music that is kind of supposed to evoke a certain emotion and be accompanied with visuals. So what, I guess, technically, can you get into a little bit for a noob, explain like I'm five kind of deal, into the differences in those kinds of scores or music?
Well, first of all, the way movie music works is when it is accompanying the images, the visual images, or sometimes the case might be vice versa, that you're getting the feeling emotionally from the prompts that you're getting musically, and then you're fed the images. Oftentimes, a composer, for example, will have a sinister sounding, kind of menacing quality to it before something actually happens, and you're anticipating it. You know something's about to happen. I mean, the very best film experiences, I think, are when people can't really separate their senses from what they're watching and from what they're hearing. They're just simply experiencing it all at once. and they're really not sure where one leaves off and the other one takes over. And I think that's where the most skillful composers of film, I mean, because obviously the film composer has to have the images and the story first and then writes the music to it. So it's always in that order. But for the listener, for the observer, it's not always in that order. So I would say, even for people, I mean, I'm going back over some of this music in preparation for this concert. And I have to say that sometimes when I'm going through the music, I have to think, no, wait, what was happening at that particular time in the movie? And yet, for me, the music is so explicit in some ways that I almost feel like I don't have to know. And I think that's with a lot of great music. It's like that. I mean, it's more fun to actually know what's happening. This is Fox the Phoenix. And so, oh, yes, we know this sounds like this beautiful soaring theme. Can't you feel it? You know, and when you actually know that, it does do something more. But with the really great music, the images are a bonus. But I don't know. I'm just saying this for some people who may want to just come enjoy this concert and not be able to remember every single part of every movie.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Yeah, some of the best film scores that I probably have on my Spotify playlist are just ones that I just enjoy listening to, but they do have that kind of evoking the images or the memories of the movie as well. So I have to ask, is there a favorite song on the list that you'll be playing?
I have to say, there's so much that I like. Like I would say I like this one the most. And then I think, well, actually, no. I mean, Hedwig's theme, obviously, like right from the beginning, it's so arresting right from the get-go, and is really kind of the calling card, I mean, through so much of it. And it's actually where you see some thematic transformation. But I also love the Chamber of Secrets which is the actual Chamber of Secrets from the Chamber of Secrets. I love that as well. It's really hard for me to narrow it down, but I feel like that encompasses so much right there.
Yeah. Yeah. And when you hum that opening track, dun, dun, da, 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 it's so catchy. And one of the things that I've kind of been wrestling with is like, what makes it so catchy and what makes it so iconic that anyone can hum it and know exactly what you're talking about? Is it that it's first in our minds? It's the first entry that we have into this movie, or is there some musical manipulation going on there?
I think the first thing that we're drawn to, and this is just, I'll speak only from my perspective, but the fact that it's a solo instrument and that we're hearing just the celeste or celesta playing at the beginning is already, it just is so, it's so arresting. Like it just gets your attention immediately, like what's going to happen. It doesn't smack you over the head. In other words, it draws you in. It's really like someone's going to say, I have a story to tell you, but they start with something that's very mysterious. It's also in a minor mode, which already creates a little bit more of a mystery rather than something that's happy. And so it's something that's foreboding. And I think it just gets our attention, puts us a little bit on the edge of our seats. We're not used to hearing that particular timbre from the orchestra to begin. So I think it just has a spellbinding quality because it's by itself as a celeste and it's in a minor mode. It's also, like you said, it's very catchy. It's something that you hear once and it would just be there. And that I think comes a lot from the talent of a composer to be able to find some sort of melody that just locks in somehow. And I think it's because, I mean, from a technical standpoint, if you're talking music theory, he's usually using kind of structural notes in a melody. Like if you make an octave and then you divide the octave in half, it's a fifth and a fourth. And so he plays with these kinds of intervals. And I think it's very easy for the listener to remember them, which that's just, I think it's just the way we react to vibrations. So that's what I think. It is an iconic sound. And I think that's how he draws us in.
Awesome. Are there any, so you mentioned, what was the instrument that you mentioned that was played?
Celeste, the celeste,
Celeste.
or some people say it celesta or
Okay.
celeste. I just say the celeste, but celesta. It's a keyboard instrument,
Oh,
and so it kind of looks like a tiny piano. And people who are used to hearing Dance of the Sugar Plum Fairy from Tchaikovsky's Nutcracker from the ballet, or the Nutcracker Suite, they hear the Dance of the Sugar Plum Fairy. They're used to hearing that. It's a very chimey, bell-like instrument, and it can have a quality of sounding very magical. I mean,
mm,
that's how it's used even in Tchaikovsky's ballet. But it also can sound a little foreboding. If it's playing in a minor key, that little sound of the bell, it's considered part of the percussion family, will I think it elicits a sense of mystery and intrigue.
okay, interesting. So are there are there a lot of, so he John Williams uses this instrument. Are there any other instruments that he uses that are that kind of make this, I guess, this music sound so magical? Is there like a set a set number of instruments that you would use to kind of evoke that?
I think what he does, instead of, I mean, he does use instruments. I think like the harp, for example,
Mm.
can have a kind of startling sound. It can kind of mimic the feeling of going back in time or forward in time, or a sense of a memory. You know, when they use a harp glissando, that's
Yeah.
what a glissando is, when they just kind of run their fingers over the strings quickly. And if you use it very quickly, if you do a very quick harp glissando, it can almost make it sound like people are flying, you know, like, or people are fluttering around or hitting, you know, falling down or something like that. So it can be the instruments like harp and celeste work well, but I think it's also how Williams uses um, surprise. So in preparing for this concert, I'm kind of going back over some of the music, and it's the unexpected things, you know, just like with humor. If you're not expecting something and then it comes out and grabs you, and you weren't anticipating it, sometimes that's what's funny, but that's also what can be fearful or magical, is something that you're going headlong this way, but suddenly something that you weren't expecting jumps in, like some sort of weird interruption. Like you're listening to a nice melody and all of a sudden there's this horrible discord that comes from the brass. Well, the brass aren't necessarily just a magical or scary sound, but if they're in the right context, or in this case in the wrong context, if you're in one context and something comes out of the blue, it can be very shocking, and therefore can have a magical effect if it sounds whimsical and cute, or it can sound scary if it sounds menacing or diabolical. So I would say it's a combination of which instrument he's using, but how he's using the instruments. Or in the case of the harp, or in the case of harmonies, sometimes it'll be a very major makes us feel like everything's happy and everything's going well. And then when a minor mode comes in, it's when you lower the third degree of a scale, all of a sudden we feel like there's something that's unstable and it's not at rest. And that's what composers use as a device to create a sense of instability, a feeling that not all is right. So it can be harmonies, unexpected things, and instruments, I think, that
Awesome.
can cause the magical sound and the sound of surprise.
Okay, that's very cool. So speaking of, so John Williams made the music for the first three Harry Potter movies. So we go through kind of a transition with the first movie, which is lots of light hijinks, adventure, and a little bit of darkness at the end. But as each movie progresses, the Dark Lord is coming ever nearer. So the general tone of the movies are darker, a little bit more adult, as well. So do you feel that you see the music also shifts through each movie that you see?
I think it does. I what I've noticed is that in the first one, like you say, where it's like a little bit like spirits, children playing, and there's just little hints of it here and there. It just starts to barely insert itself. As you get farther on into the movies, it's as though the composer, along with supporting Rowling's story, is cutting to the chase much faster. So you're not hearing this kind of flirtation with something that's diabolical, but you're going right to it. And there's unrest we feel right from the beginning. And obviously the music dwells there a lot more. Now, one thing I want to mention now, because I think it's appropriate in our conversation from the questions you're asking, is that John Williams and even Patrick Doyle and the other composers who composed after that for the Harry Potter series, they use a device, a musical device, and it's called a light motif. That's L-E-I, light, like a German word light, L-E-I-T, motif. And that is when you take a little theme that can represent a character, for example. This is taken from Richard Wagner from the 19th century when he composed The Ring cycle. And he was, Richard Wagner, a German composer, he's really the first one to develop the idea of a leitmotif representing a person or a character in a story, and then using that exact same leitmotif, which is just a few notes or a short melody, to transform it over time to show how that person's psychological outlook has changed over time, or to show how their role has changed over time. And it's always identified with that person or with an event. And John Williams took a page right out of Richard Wagner's playbook when he started to take these themes and subtly transform them over time. And that's something that we can start to see as we go through the series, because you can hear a lot of the music recur, obviously, from the beginning throughout, but they change sometimes subtly and sometimes quite obviously. And I think that they're using this idea of leitmotif in representing characters or the situation and changing it to fit the context of each new movie.
That is so freaking cool. Just like you can go through musical arcs just the same as character arcs. That's fascinating.
Well, and I would wager that most of the listeners who are not necessarily thinking so much about the music, but are just absorbed in the movie itself, if they really sat and listened closely, they would know, like, they probably do this already without consciously knowing it. But when they hear the theme of a certain character coming before that character shows up, they already know it's going to happen. Mm-hmm. That's partly because they might know the movie itself so well, but also just because it works psychologically well on the observer to hear that something is going to happen. And sure enough, there that character appears. So yeah, it is an interesting transformative process, not only with the characters, but with the music itself. So I would challenge listeners to pay attention to that as they're watching their movies again.
That's cool. Awesome. So you mentioned there are multiple composers across the Harry Potter series. John Williams, the first three, and then I believe Patrick Doyle was definitely the Goblet of Fire, which y'all will be playing. So it dips into John Williams and then Patrick Doyle in your upcoming concert. So how does a composer transition and absorb some of an iconic John Williams style and but at the same time make it their own, I suppose?
Yeah, it's a tall order because as you mentioned, John Williams, what an iconic film composer. I mean, one of the greatest, in fact, maybe the greatest film composer right now. So it's really big shoes to fill. And I'm sure that the other composers that had to fill in, Patrick Doyle and Nicholas Hooper and Alexandre Desplat, those were the other three composers. The good news is that I think the music is phenomenal throughout all of the movies. And I think that these other composers knew that they had big shoes to fill, and they are really great composers. I mean, John Williams is known already because he's been in the business so long. I mean, he's in his mid-80s and he's still writing music. So he's been around for so long. That's partly why he's iconic. and so many people know his movies. But these other composers are also great film composers. And if you listen closely, you see that they retain the idea and some of the themes that John Williams had come up with, but they just have their own unique voice. And it's not better or worse, in my opinion. It just has something, it just sounds different. And just like even if someone is trying to copy someone, I mean, if you sat down and tried to copy being Jane Austen as an author, I mean, you could maybe come close, but your own voice couldn't help but come out. And I think that's with these other composers too. They know they have a responsibility to the franchise. They know they have to continue this idea. They understand the stories very well, and they use their own voice while still developing some of the themes. So it does sound different. It's very difficult to articulate. John Williams has kind of a signature way that he uses the brass voicing of certain chords. He has a certain way of orchestrating that's just slightly different than how another composer will orchestrate, and that's not just about the music. That's how they choose which instruments are going to play which theme. And so sometimes that is a little bit different. Sometimes John Williams's music has a little bit more complexity to the scoring itself, and that isn't something that's always obvious to a listener. But I can tell you that the music for all of this music, even though it's not really a classical concert in the sense that it's not like we're playing Tchaikovsky or Brahms or Beethoven, but the music is very challenging. It's technically difficult to play, whether it's John Williams or Patrick Doyle. It's all very, very challenging, and really has to have all the musicians, we're all on our toes to be able to play this music well. So people will notice, if they're listening very carefully, a difference going to Patrick Doyle. But in my opinion, the music doesn't diminish in this particular case.
That's good. Yeah. Yeah. I personally love the Desplat's soundtracks. They're gorgeous.
They're fabulous. And in some ways, I mean, there's certain things I think, wow, I mean, it's not John Williams, but it's so awesome. I mean, who knows if he could have done, if John Williams had to write the same for the music for the same movie that he did, would it be better? It's, one can't say, because we just don't know. But yeah, he's a great composer.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think maybe you touched on this a few times, but is there something of musical interest that someone like me might not notice, and something that you just absolutely geek out over?
Well, you know, I'm always, whenever I watch any movie, whether it's Harry Potter or, you know, Star Wars movies from before, or any movie, I'm always, I would say, pretty hyper aware of the music. I would say, if you're really paying a little bit more attention, it's how a composer can anticipate what's going on. And I mean, even you choosing silence. Sometimes, because I'm watching a movie, I'm thinking, why didn't they write any music for this? And I realize how much stronger the scene is on its own without any music. And then when you just hear one note coming in, you know, it's like, uh-oh, what is that? You something, my awareness is very much peaked for those kinds of things. So I think anticipation, I would listen with anticipating what's going to happen based on the music that you have at the moment. And also what music is used to sometimes almost further the plot, or how music is used in, let's say, a chase scene, or when you see a certain character, really listening closely to that music and seeing if it's something that's, if the character is a farcical person or a serious person or a loved person. Is the music marked by dignity or evil? You know, try to put words to those things, because I think you'll really find it informative. So that's, I would say that's one of the things that I geek out when I'm listening and watching. The other thing, I don't know if it's possible for your base here who's listening tonight to this, can do this because it's rather technically difficult to do. But if you were able to turn the soundtrack down so that you could maybe barely hear the dialogue, and maybe you just use subtitles, and if you know the films well, you can kind of hear the voices in your mind, but hear it without music, just for a stretch of time. Sometimes that helps one be aware of just how much the music is adding to the scene. Because some people say, well, I didn't even really notice the music. I would beg to differ. I think they didn't notice it consciously, but they noticed it subconsciously because it supports the scene. And in the best film writing, you know, and as I mentioned before, one supports the other in such a way that you can't really differentiate sometimes what's really governing your emotions, because one underscores the other so much. So if that's possible, try to watch something without the soundtrack for a little bit and then turn it up and go, oh, okay. That's what the composer is adding.
Actually, it's and I'm gonna date myself a little bit. Back when I had the DVD copy of Harry Potter, I think it was the Chamber of Secrets. I watched the behind the scenes footage, and there was a special portion of that behind the scenes footage where John Williams was talking about how much music adds to a scene, and they played a scene where there was, I think it was Harry was running at Ron and Hermione, I think after being in the Chamber of Secrets and returning, and he's alive and everything's happy. And they played that section of the scene without music. And I'm like, what is happening right now? It's so eerie.
Yeah. Yeah. It would be like watching a ballet or something without hearing any waltz or something like that. It just something big is really missing.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, I'm going to check to see if there are any questions in the chat. And it looks like Bob says the orchestra must enjoy playing this music.
It's true. The orchestra does enjoy playing it. I will say that it's a big challenge. I mentioned it earlier when I was talking that the music is technically demanding for the musicians. Any kind of film music, including this music of Harry Potter, is often put in a concert that's categorized more as it's kind of crossover because it's not classical music, but it's also not really considered popsy music, like real pop music. Film composition is considered a serious art form, but it's not like as serious as, let's say, Beethoven or Brahms. So it has this kind of its own category. And so sometimes people not in the music world will say, oh, well, film music, you know, that's not as difficult. It's like, we beg to differ because this music is a big challenge for us. But we do love playing it. It's so colorful. It just, you know, just it's the scores are splashy and illustrative, and it's just so fun to jump right into them.
Awesome. Well, is there anything else you'd like to add before we close out?
I would just like to, you know, for the people who are able to attend the concert, we don't have the actual film being shown. We're playing a lot of the excerpts, and I don't know if you have the program, if you're able to throw it up there, but if you go to binghamtonphilharmonic.org, you can actually see what we're going to do. We're going to be playing music from the first 4 movies, and we will have a narrator there who's going to be a Harry Potter geek, who's going to be setting up the scene for each bit of the music that we hear. And a lot of people are going to be following this. They're going to know exactly where that music is from. And you're to hear a live orchestra play this is really quite captivating. We did this a few years ago, and we really, really found it very popular with our community. So we're looking forward to doing it again.
Wonderful. Well, I can't wait. I will most likely get tickets.
Good. Well, I hope so. And, you know, tell your friends about it.
Oh, always, always. All right. Well, thank you all for joining us. And thank you, Daniel, for generously donating your time to talk with us and geeking out with us. And if, do I have a hand raised? Does somebody want to ask a question, or somebody just pressed the button accidentally? Oh, well.
Well, someone did ask again, will there be any visuals from the film? And I
gotcha.
I didn't. I just mentioned that, that we won't be showing those. That's an extra copyright kind of thing to do that. And also because we're jumping around through the movies in order to do this as efficiently as possible. So we don't have the visuals, but when we've done this before, and we've done Star Wars before also, of John Williams music, and we pack the house out just to play the music because people already have it vividly imagined what's going on the screen in their minds.
Awesome. Yeah, I really enjoyed the Star Wars one that I went to go see on May the 4th, perhaps.
Yeah, and we're hoping to do that again in another May the 4th.
Yeah.
In the future.
And Kelly says it would be a wonderful opportunity to introduce a younger audience to live music. And I totally agree.
It's perfect. That's a very observant comment. It is perfect for that because the kids will already know the music and they get to see the orchestra play it right then. Absolutely. And be aware of that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you all for coming. Thank you, Daniel, for your time. I can't wait to see the show. And I dropped the link to the Binghamton Philharmonic in the chat, and I'll be sure to send it out also in the email. And also, if anybody's looking for more Robercon pop-up events, I'm also going to drop a link to our upcoming Sci-Fi Coup with Wendy Van Camp coming up this weekend, October 16th. So you get to create a new world, a sci-fi world out of poetry. So if y'all want to join us for that and Harry Potter at the Binghamton Philharmonic with the Binghamton Philharmonic Orchestra, please feel free. But otherwise, hope to see y'all again soon, whether it be online or in person.